There's a word, a single word, that can dissolve everything you believe yourself to be. For 800 years, ancient spiritual brotherhoods guarded this word in absolute secrecy, not by choice, but for survival, because anyone who uttered it disappeared. I'm not talking about physical death. I'm talking about something far more radical, the death of the ego, the complete dissolution of the illusion of separation that keeps you trapped in this fragmented reality. Eckhart Tolle spent decades studying this very dissolution, but what he discovered on a lonely park bench, these brotherhoods knew 8 centuries ago, and they developed a technology for it, a spiritual technology so powerful it was censored, forbidden, kept only among initiates who swore silence with their very lives. Today, you'll discover why. But first, let me ask a question that will unsettle your mind for the next few minutes. If a technique exists capable of instantly dissolving the feeling of being a self, separate from the universe, why was it hidden? Why wasn't it freely taught? The answer will shake everything you think about spirituality. In the 13th century, in a mystical city in Anatolia, a man named Rumi danced in circles. He spun and spun until something extraordinary happened. His personality simply evaporated. What remained wasn't Rumi, it was pure consciousness. Consciousness without a center, without edges, without the prison of the self. But Rumi wasn't alone in this discovery. He was part of a secret lineage of mystics who had developed the most radical of all spiritual practices, the sacred sound practice. This practice means remembrance, but not the ordinary remembrance you know. It's the remembrance of who you truly are, when you stop pretending to be who you think you are. And at the heart of this practice was a mantra, a sacred sound repeated in a specific way until it literally rewrote the chemistry of your brain, until it erased you, to reveal what was always there. Imagine for a moment that your mind is like a turbulent lake. Each thought is a wave that distorts the reflection of the moon on the surface. You spend your whole life looking at these waves, thinking they are reality. The ancient sacred sound practice was like throwing a special stone into that lake. A stone that, instead of creating more waves, calmed the entire surface. And when the surface became perfectly smooth, you saw that there was never any separation between you and the moon. You were the reflection. You were the moon. You were the lake itself. But here's what almost nobody tells you about this technique. It worked too fast. Within weeks, experienced practitioners could access states of consciousness that would take decades to reach through other methods. They transcended not only personality, but the very notion of existing as a separate entity, and that frightened the religious authorities of the time, because a human being who has transcended the ego cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated by fear, does not obey hierarchies based on temporal power. An awakened being is, by definition, dangerous to any system that depends on keeping people asleep. That's when the persecutions began. In 1478, religious persecutions declared certain sacred sound practices heretical, but it wasn't just a religious decision, it was a carefully calculated political strategy. Historical records show that practitioners of this practice were refusing to pay taxes to the church, not out of rebellion, but because they had transcended the fear of punishment. They literally couldn't be threatened anymore. Imagine the terror of the authorities realizing they were dealing with human beings who had become immune to psychological control. An inquisitor of the time wrote in his diaries, "They look at us as if we were seeing through us, as if they knew something that makes us ridiculous. There's no way to break a man who has already voluntarily broken himself in God." Entire libraries were burned, sacred texts destroyed, masters executed. But what was most disturbing to the authorities was that even when tortured, the practitioners maintained a serenity that left the torturers themselves shaken. They had discovered something that made them indestructible, and that was intolerable to any system based on domination. But the knowledge didn't die. It hid. The ancient brotherhoods became secret societies. The sacred sound practice was taught only from master to disciple, whispered in underground caves, transmitted through codes and symbols that seemed like innocent poetry to those who couldn't see. And the mantra, the mantra received special protection, because this specific mantra wasn't just a technique, it was a master key, a vibrational frequency that unlocked the door between the conditioned self and pure consciousness. The Brotherhoods discovered that certain sound combinations have the power to synchronize brainwaves so precisely that the analytical mind simply switches off. And when the analytical mind switches off, you begin to exist from a completely different place. Eckhart Tolle calls this presence. The Brotherhoods called it Fana, the extinction of the illusory self. But both are talking about the same inner revolution, the same radical awakening that undoes once and for all the lie that you are just a body-mind lost in the cosmos. You know that feeling that there's something much bigger happening in your life, but you can't touch it directly. As if there were a vaster reality just beyond a transparent wall, the Brotherhoods found a way to go through that wall, and the tool they used was vibrational. It was sonic. It was a mantra so precisely calibrated that it worked as a master key to the gates of perception. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Modern studies in neuroplasticity confirm what the Brotherhoods knew 800 years ago. Specific sound repetitions can permanently alter the structure of the brain. Dr. Andrew Newberg of the University of Pennsylvania discovered that mantras repeated at certain frequencies decrease the activity of the posterior parietal cortex, the region responsible for the sensation of having a self separate from the world. But what Newberg found was even more surprising. Regular practitioners of the sacred sound practice showed permanent changes in gray matter density. Literally, their brains restructured themselves to sustain states of unitive consciousness. The hippocampus, center of memory, expanded. The amygdala, center of fear, significantly reduced. And the insular cortex, responsible for body awareness, developed extraordinary connectivity with other brain regions. It was as if the brain was reorganizing itself to function as an organ of cosmic perception, not just individual perception. In other words, modern science has proven that the Sufi dhikr actually dissolves the neurology of the ego. And more than that, it rebuilds the nervous system to permanently sustain the experience of unity. But the Sufis didn't need brain scans to know this. They had something better. They had 800 years of direct experience, and what they discovered was revolutionary. They discovered that there's a specific frequency that, when pronounced with the correct technique, synchronizes the brain hemispheres, calms the nervous system, and opens what they called the ear of the heart. The ear of the heart isn't a metaphor. It's a real neurophysiological state where perception expands beyond the usual limits of ordinary consciousness. In this state, you no longer need to believe you are one with the universe. You know it. You experience it directly, cellularly, unquestionably. But there's a specific reason why this technique was kept secret for so long. And it's not just because it works too fast. It's because it works so well that it can be dangerous for those who aren't prepared. Imagine you've spent your entire life believing you were a single drop of water in the ocean, and suddenly, one afternoon, you realize you are the entire ocean pretending to be a drop. This realization can be devastating for a psyche that hasn't been adequately prepared. That's why the Sufis created not only the mantra, but an entire system of psychological and spiritual preparation around it. They knew that dissolving the ego without having first built a solid foundation of self-knowledge was like blowing up a house without having built another one to live in. You'd be left with nowhere to dwell. But when the technique is applied correctly by someone who has gone through the proper process of inner purification, the results are extraordinary. The practitioner experiences what the Sufis called sekher, a divine intoxication, where the boundaries between observer and observed simply disappear. And unlike psychoactive substances or other consciousness-altering techniques, this state isn't temporary. It becomes your new default reality. You wake up in the morning already living from this expanded consciousness. You go to sleep at night still connected to this inner vastness. Your life becomes a spontaneous expression of this unity you've discovered yourself to be. That's why Eckhart Tolle says that you are not the thinker of your thoughts. He's describing exactly the same state that the Sufis achieved through dhikr, a state where you realize you've always been the consciousness observing the thoughts, not the collection of thoughts you imagined yourself to be. But there's something that even Eckhart Tolle doesn't emphasize enough about this awakening. It's that it doesn't happen gradually. It happens suddenly, like turning on a light in a dark room. One moment you're trapped in the darkness of identification with the mind. The next moment, the entire room of your experience is illuminated, and you see that the darkness was never real. It was just the absence of you being conscious of who you always were. The Sufis understood that awakening isn't a process, it's a recognition. And this recognition can be precipitated by specific tools. Dhikr was the most powerful of these tools. But then you must be wondering, if this technique is so transformative, why isn't it widely taught today? Why did you have to wait until now to find out about it? The answer will surprise you, because it never stopped being taught. It just changed form. Today, contemporary masters like Eckhart Tolle, Mooji, Rupert Spira, and many others are transmitting the same essence through languages more suited to the modern mentality. When Eckhart talks about presence, he's describing exactly the state that the Sufis achieved through Dhikr. When Mooji invites you to be what you are, he's pointing to the same dissolution of the ego that the sacred sound produced. Rupert Spira uses the metaphor of the movie screen on which all the films appear. The Sufis used the metaphor of the mirror in which all forms are reflected. Different words and same realization, but here's something fascinating that few realize. Eckhart Tolle spent 2 years in suicidal depression before his awakening. Mooji experienced years of intense spiritual seeking. Rupert studied Advaita Vedanta philosophy for decades. The Sufis offered a more direct path, a specific technology that could accelerate this process of dissolution without requiring years of suffering or intellectual study. It's as if they discovered a neurological shortcut to the same destination that these modern masters reached through longer and more tortuous paths. And now, after 800 years kept within secret orders, this specific technique is being released again, not because the world has become more prepared for it, but because the world desperately needs the transformation it offers. We live in an era of extreme fragmentation, a time where the illusion of separation has created crises that threaten the very continuity of the human species. The technique the Sufis guarded may be exactly what we need to remember who we truly are before it's too late. But before revealing the mantra itself, you need to understand how it works, because it's not just about repeating a word. It's about entering a specific state of receptivity where the word can do its work of dissolution. It's about becoming, for a few moments, completely vulnerable to the truth of what you are. And this vulnerability, this total surrender, is what transforms a simple word into a key to the infinite. Pause for a moment. Breathe deeply. Feel the air entering your lungs. Because what I'm about to reveal will completely change your understanding of what is possible for a human being to experience. The mantra that the Sufis guarded for 800 years is simpler than you imagine, and more powerful than you can conceive. It's a word you already know, a word you've heard thousands of times, but never in the way I'm going to teach you now. The word is Allah. Now, before your mind reacts with any religious concepts you may have, let me explain something crucial. For the Sufi, Allah wasn't the name of an external deity. It was the designation of pure consciousness itself, of the fundamental reality that you are when you stop pretending to be limited. Allah literally meant that which cannot be named, the unnameable, the absolute, what Eckhart Tolle calls the timeless now. But here's the secret that's been suppressed. It's not the word itself that holds the power. It's the specific way it's pronounced and absorbed by the nervous system. The Sufis discovered that when you pronounce Allah in a particular way, something extraordinary happens in your brain. The word unfolds in 4 sonic phases: A, La, La, Ah. Each phase activates a specific region of the nervous system. Each syllable is like a key, unlocking a different door of perception. The initial A resonates in the center of your chest, activating what modern neuroscience calls the vagus nerve. This nerve is responsible for the body's deep relaxation response. The first La vibrates in the throat, stimulating the thyroid gland and synchronizing the brain hemispheres. The second La resonates in the head, quieting the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for incessant mental chatter. And the final Ah dissolves into silence, creating a space of pure receptivity where consciousness can recognize itself. But the technique goes far beyond pronunciation. The Sufis discovered that the mantra needs to be synchronized with the breath in a very specific way. You inhale in silence, and on the exhale, you allow the Allah to arise naturally, as if it were the air itself leaving your lungs, transformed into sacred sound. It's not you who pronounces the mantra. It's the mantra that pronounces itself through you. And when this happens correctly, you experience something that goes far beyond any ordinary meditative state. You experience what the Sufis called hal, a state of consciousness where the practitioner literally disappears and only the practice remains, happening by itself. It's as if the entire universe becomes a single vibration, and you realize you've always been that vibration, just pretending to be someone listening to it. But there's something even deeper to this technique that few masters reveal. The true power of the dhikr isn't in what happens while you practice. It's in what continues to happen after you stop, because this word, pronounced with the correct technique, literally implants itself in your nervous system. It continues to vibrate subtly in the background of your consciousness, even when you're not actively practicing. It's as if you've planted a sonic seed in the soil of your soul, and this seed germinates on its own, growing and blossoming until your entire life becomes an expression of this inner mantra. You wake up in the morning, and before you even form your first thought, you're already vibrating at this frequency. You walk down the street, and your presence carries this quality of vibratory silence that touches the people around you without you doing anything. You get into an argument, and you automatically respond from this center of stillness that never gets agitated. This is the permanent transformation that the Sufis achieved, and this is why the authorities tried to suppress them, because a human being living in this state is immune to manipulation, immune to fear, immune to the neurotic need for external validation. He becomes a point of stability in a chaotic world, a source of peace in a fragmented reality, and in an era where controlling the masses depended on keeping people in states of anxiety and constant striving. This was extremely threatening, but now you know. Now you have access to the same knowledge that has been kept secret for 800 years. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? Because knowing the technique intellectually changes nothing. It's like having the recipe for a medicine but never taking it. The transformation only happens in practice, in direct experience, in the courage to repeatedly dissolve until nothing remains but pure consciousness, vibrating as existence. And yes, it can be scary at first, because the mind will resist. It will invent 1,000 excuses not to practice. It will create doubts, fears, distractions, because the mind knows that this practice is its death sentence, not the death of the body, the death of the illusion of control, the death of the narrative of separation that it spends its entire life building and defending. But on the other side of this death is real life, the life you are when you stop pretending to be who you think you are. And this life, this awakened existence, is vaster, richer, fuller than anything the mind can imagine. Now, let me give you the exact practical instructions as they were transmitted through the Sufi lineages. First, understand that there are 3 levels to this practice. The first level is mechanical. You learn to synchronize sound and breath. This is where most people stop, thinking they've already understood the technique. The second level is energetic. The mantra begins to vibrate in your nervous system even when you're not actively practicing. This is when the real transformation begins. The third level is complete dissolution. There is no longer a practitioner nor a practice. Only the infinite vibrating as pure existence. Sit comfortably, but with your spine erect. The Sufis knew that posture directly affects the quality of consciousness. Close your eyes gently. Don't squeeze your eyelids. Let them rest like curtains being closed by a gentle breeze. Let your breath become natural, but observe it with a specific quality of attention, not the focused attention you use to solve problems, but panoramic attention, like someone contemplating a sunset. Breathe deeply 3 times, releasing any tension on the exhale. On the third exhale, allow a natural sigh to arise. This sigh is your soul preparing to receive the sacred. Now, begin simply observing the air entering and leaving, without forcing anything, just allowing the body to breathe on its own. When you feel relaxed, and this may take a few minutes, on the next exhale, allow a very soft Allah to arise with the outgoing air. Here's the secret that few know. Pronounce it in such a way that the word lasts almost the entire exhalation. It's not a quick Allah. It's Allah-la-ah, dissolving slowly into silence. Feel the initial A resonating in the center of your chest. Let this vibration spread throughout your thorax like ripples on a lake. The first La rises to your throat. Feel the vibration there, as if your throat were a gently struck bell. The second La resonates in your head. Allow this sound to completely wash over your mind, dissolving any thoughts that remain, and the final R dissolves into infinite silence. Let this silence expand. Don't rush to the next breath. On the next inhalation, return to silence. Let this empty space fill with stillness. Feel as if you are drinking silence through your pores. On your next exhale, another Allah, even more subtle, as if your soul itself were whispering its truest name. Continue like this for at least 20 minutes, but if you feel like continuing, keep going. The practice has its own intelligence, and it will show you when it's time to stop and observe what happens, but observe without judgment, without expectation. Like a curious scientist studying a brand new phenomenon, notice how, gradually, the sensation of being someone doing a practice begins to dissolve. Notice how the mantra starts to pronounce itself. Notice how you begin to disappear, until only the sound of infinity recognizing itself remains. That's the technique. Simple as that. But don't be fooled by the simplicity. The Sufis knew that the deepest truths are always packaged in the simplest forms, and this specific technique has been calibrated through centuries of experimentation to produce maximum transformation with minimum effort. But there's something important I need to warn you about. This practice will change you in ways you cannot predict, and not all of these changes will be immediately comfortable. People close to you may find your newfound serenity strange. They may interpret your peace as indifference. They may feel threatened by your lack of neurotic need for approval. Some friendships may naturally dissolve, not through conflict, but because you simply no longer vibrate at the same frequency of drama and constant complaint. Certain ambitions that once motivated you may completely lose their meaning. The race for status, accumulation, or recognition may seem as empty as a child's game, and for a while, you may feel like a stranger in your own life, as if you're observing from afar a person who used to be you, participating in activities that no longer make sense. This transition period may last weeks or months. The Sufis called this fana, a necessary psychological death that precedes spiritual rebirth. But on the other side of this dissolution lies something indescribable, a lightness of being, a joy without cause, a natural compassion that spontaneously arises without effort. You become like a spring that doesn't need to be pumped to give water. Peace, wisdom, love flow naturally through you, because you've discovered that you were always made of these qualities. This practice can be addictive, not in the destructive sense we usually associate with addiction, but in the sense that once you experience the peace that's available at your own center, nothing else in the external world can satisfy in the same way. It's as if you discovered you always had access to an inexhaustible source of inner well-being, but spent your whole life searching for crumbs of happiness in the external world. People who practice dhikr regularly report extraordinary changes. Their relationships transform because they stop seeking completeness through others. They stop asking neurotic questions like, "Do you love me?" because they discover unconditional love within themselves. Their work becomes a form of spontaneous service because the compulsive need for external validation disappears. They work not out of fear of not having enough, but out of joy in expressing their natural gifts. Their existential fears, fear of death, fear of loneliness, fear of insignificance, dissolve because they discover they were always what they thought they were searching for. You can continue living normally, working, relating, fulfilling your responsibilities, but always with the awareness that this infinite dimension is available with every breath, as if you were an actor completely absorbed in the role, but always conscious that it's just a performance in a larger play. And the more you practice, the more this dimension becomes your primary reality. The external world doesn't disappear, but it becomes secondary, like a movie you're watching. Knowing it's just a movie, you still get emotional with the story, still get involved with the characters, but you never forget it's just a projection on the screen of consciousness. And this perspective, this eagle's eye view of existence, changes everything. Your problems don't disappear, but they lose their ability to possess you. Your relationships don't become perfect, but they gain a quality of presence that automatically heals. Your work remains work, but it becomes a form of celebrating life happening through you. This is the promise the Sufis guarded for 800 years, and now it's yours. But remember what Rumi said, you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. The mantra you just learned is just a reminder of this truth. A pointer pointing to the moon you always were. And when you finally look in the right direction, you realize there was never any difference between the pointing finger, the moon pointed to, and the one who is looking. It was always a single consciousness playing a game of forgetting and remembering itself. Sufi dhikr is simply a very elegant way to accelerate this remembering. Use it well, use it with reverence, use it until it becomes unnecessary. Until you realize you were always the mantra you once imagined you were chanting. And when that moment arrives, you will understand why this technique needed to be kept secret for so long, not because it's dangerous, but because it's too powerful to be understood by minds that still believe they are separate from what they seek. Now you know. Now you can experience. And in the silence that follows the last repetition of your dhikr today, perhaps you will discover that there was never anyone practicing, only infinity recognizing its own face in the mirror of human consciousness. Allah, Allah, Allah. Silence. And in that silence, everything you've ever searched for finally finds you.